You cannot take that which I freely give. You cannot take that which I freely give. That is the mantra I remember my friend teaching us. It seemed like a cheap trick at first, something for a poster with an eagle soaring on it. But when that black truck bearing an Oregonian sticker cut me off, I heard myself begin to chant, "You cannot take that which I freely give," instead of the rant I felt boiling up inside of me. And do you know that it actually worked? Actually talked me down off the emotional ledge from which I was about to lurch, wasting all of my expletive energies he so clearly did not deserve. And so now I take this phrase with me wherever it is I go. The hospital, my family. For I have seen that no matter how hard we cling to life, the time for leaving inevitably comes. I have seen no matter how hard we cling to life, the time for leaving inevitably comes. And the only question at the end is whether we claw at disappearance or learn to say, "You cannot take that which I freely give," giving thanks for all that was and blessing all that still is. I wrote this poem last July. My family was coming back from the Wallawas, and I was driving. The phrase comes from a friend of mine, Ryan Schroner. He used to be the pastor down the road here at Woodburn. This was many years ago, and one time a bunch of friends and we were all together with him, and he was saying that when something frustrating happens that he can't do anything about, he will say this phrase, "You cannot take that which I freely give." And when I first heard it, I did kind of my internal eye roll, which I am wont to do. Like, great, a magic phrase. That's wonderful. And yet, I found myself on this highway. I had some of my kids in the car, and it was 84 through the Blue Mountains, and there was nobody around. Like, you could see for miles, and there was nobody around. And then this black truck, I could see in my side view mirror, was just hurtling towards me. I don't know how fast he was going, but it was so fast. And remember, there's like nobody around. He gets right up to my side, and then he cuts over right into my lane, causing me to brake. And all of a sudden, as I'm kind of boiling and wanting to explode, this phrase comes back into my mind: "You cannot take that which I freely give." And instead of blowing up and scaring my kids, I was able to be like, "Hey, I can't control what this idiot's doing, but I can at least try to breathe through this." This poem came to me this week as we are experiencing more and more challenges, and it feels like more and more is being taken from us. Our ability to gather, our ability to connect. We have to practice social distancing, and we should. Both of our texts this morning are about social distancing. I don't know if you noticed that. First one, the one that Ian read, and I don't think they could hear everything in the beginning. We're working out our tech. It's a lot better today, though. The story is about Samuel, who is this great prophet in Israel, and Samuel had anointed Saul as the very first king over Israel, but it wasn't going very well. And Samuel was not happy about this, and God is basically telling him, maybe stop whining about this and do something. So Samuel takes off, and I imagine Samuel is this kind of Gandalfian figure with this giant staff, and we know he has a sword from another text. And he makes it to Jesse's spread, and he says to Jesse, "Bring out all your sons." And Jesse lines his sons up before him. And this is like an ancient Hebrew version of Cinderella. with the slipper, and it's not fitting. He's going to each son, and it's not fitting. Honestly, I mean, this is the Emperor's New Groove, right? Where Emperor Cusco, who's this petulant little punk, they line up all these women that he might choose for a wife, and he's like, no, hate your hair. Let me guess, you have a great personality. Samuel's going to each of these guys, and he's like, well, he's tall. God's like, nah. And he goes, well, he's good looking. And God's like, is he? And he gets to the end, and it's none of them. And so Samuel says to Jesse, are these all your sons? I'm confused. And Jesse's like, well, there's that one. There's the youngest. Did you ever wonder why it was that when Samuel asked Jesse to produce all of his sons, that he left his youngest socially distanced in the fields and isolated? The rabbis wondered that. I love the rabbis because when they encounter a mystery like this in the text, and they don't have an answer for it, they get curious. And one of the things that they do is they tell stories. And so the rabbis tell a midrash, a story, about why it is that David was left alone, socially isolated in the fields. And it has to do with shame. The story starts really with Jesse, David's father. Jesse was a righteous man, a good man, which is why Samuel went to him. But Jesse had a secret. So in the time that Jesse was alive, the Jews had nothing to do with people from other nations and countries. You didn't even want to eat together, much less have a relationship with someone. And if you go back in Jesse's lineage, you find a woman named Ruth. There's a whole book about Ruth. And Ruth was a Moabite. And the Moabites were not loved by the Israelites at that time. Back then, what had happened, there was a famine, and a woman named Naomi and her husband Elimelech left Israel. They went over to Moab, and their two sons were there, and the two sons married two Moabite women. And then, tragically, all the men died. And so Naomi tells her daughter-in-laws, like, you should stay here. I'm going to go back. And Orpah's like, fine, I'm good with that. But Ruth says, no, where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people are my people. That's the kind of person Ruth was. And so Naomi and Ruth go back. Ruth bags a husband named Boaz, which is a very interesting story, maybe not for the children. And they wind up having children. And their children have children. And Jesse is one of those children. So if you go back enough, Jesse has this Moabite in his family, and he's ashamed. And he begins to feel unworthy of his wife. The rabbis give her the name Nitzevet. You won't find that in the Bible, but the rabbis call her Nitzevet. And Jesse tells Nitzevet that he's not worthy to lie with her. He's not worthy to sleep with her. And that's not a bad plan for like a couple of days, a few days maybe. But Jesse's human. We have some feedback. Jesse's human. And so in a few days, after a while, he goes to Nitzevet's maidservant. And he says, prepare yourself to be boarded. I'm going to be visiting you tonight. And the maidservant goes to Nitzevet, and she tells him of this plan, and Nitzevet goes, oh, really? And so they decide to switch that night. Nitzevet goes into the maidservant's room, and the maidservant stays at Nitzevet's. And I don't know how dark it has to be or what's going on that he wouldn't know that he's sleeping with his wife and not the maidservant. But Jesse goes in and he thinks he's sleeping with the maidservant, but it's his wife. And it would have been fine except they conceive. Nitzevet becomes pregnant. And she can't tell Jesse, she feels, that she's deceived him. And it's a little hard to explain the pregnancy. That whole virgin birth thing wasn't a thing yet for like another 1,000 years. Even then, it's kind of a sketchy story. And so what to do? This is why when David is born, alone and disconnected, shame drives disconnection, Brené Brown teaches us over and over. Shame is what causes social isolation in the Old Testament text. It's not the same, though, in the New Testament. In the text that I read, we have Jesus and the disciples, and they're walking around, they're going around, and the disciples see this young man who his eyes are clouded over. It's clear that he can't see, he's blind. And the disciples decide that this is the time to be smart. This is the time to like raise their hand and be like, ooh, ooh, ooh. And it's worth a little passing note. Some of you are joining with us and you've really never been to church much or had any contact much with Scripture. And here's a word about Scripture. One of the things I love about it is that it doesn't give stained glass pictures of people. It gives really like realistic, sometimes ugly pictures of people. And whenever you have the disciples in the stories of Jesus, basically these are the people that you never, ever, ever want to be like. Whatever the disciples are doing, you can look at that and go, not that. So the disciples are like, they're always arguing about who's the greatest. When children are coming up trying to be with Jesus, they're like trying to push the children away. And this morning's a great example. So they're walking along and they see this young guy and he's begging and he's blind, he's a mess. And they go, ooh, we know what's going on here, Jesus. He says, really? We know someone sinned. We know someone made a mistake. Someone messed up, Aaron. We know there's a problem here. What we don't know is who? Is it him? Did he do it? Or is it his parents? I mean, we know it's a problem. We just don't know who. Now, that sounds horrible. In the disciples' defense, though, they were simply drafting off the wisdom of the day. In the ancient world, they didn't have a great understanding of germ theory or genetics. And especially if somebody has a congenital challenge like this, where he's blind from birth, people assumed it was a punishment from the gods. Think about it. Like if someone, even in your family, if you feel is being punished by the gods, that you don't want to have anything to do with them. You push them out and you push them away. And that's why this young man was all isolated, all alone. He had no friends, no family. And Jesus steps into this and he says, nobody sinned that he was born blind. That's not why this happened. The reality is sometimes things just happen in the world. It's uncomfortable, but it's true. So shame is what drives disconnection in the first text. Judgment and fear drive disconnection in the second. But the thing that connects them for me is that neither of these people in these stories are choosing what's happening. Neither of them are wanting to be socially isolated. David didn't wake up in the morning going, you know what, I'm actually an introvert. I'm happy here in the fields. He doesn't want to be unloved by his father. I don't know why an introvert is like a young British boy, but he is in my head apparently. And the man born blind surely isn't waking up wanting to be cut off from love and from his family. And when we aren't choosing something, when we aren't choosing it, sometimes it can feel like it's being taken from us. And when I feel like something's being taken from me, everything shuts down in my brain. I get angry, my heart rate increases, and I stop being creative. I stop being loving. And I think we have to be really mindful of that in these days. It can feel like things are being taken from us. Last week, my really good friend, Jenny Warner, Jenny's been a friend for so long. She and I went to David White together. She's now the pastor at Valley Presbyterian in Portola Valley. She does this great thing where she gets the people from her church to all do different parts of the worship, and then she video edits. She and I were talking last night. She was supposed to be here last week. For like over a month, we had planned for her to be here in Tualatin. Her church is researching stuff about family ministry, and she was going to be here and meeting with Sarah and talking about what we're doing, and she and I were going to hang out and connect. And she lives in one of the 6 counties that was closed off first in California, and then the whole state was shut down. It's not that she chose not to be here, right? Like she goes, actually, Ken, I've got a lot more on my plate than I thought. Maybe we'll do it another time. It's that she wasn't allowed to be here, and it can feel like things are being taken from us. And when we have that feeling, that's when we have to remember this phrase: "You cannot take that which I freely give," because the assumption that we make when something's being taken from us is that we actually have control over anything in the first place. Like this sense of social isolation, distancing, like being asked to distance, nothing's being taken from us. The reality is that we've never had control over any part of the world, ever. And this virus, it's just happened. And now the caring and the wise and the kind thing to do is to practice social distancing. And when we feel like something's being taken from us, that's when we have to go, wait, you cannot take that which I freely give. Like, remember that truck that, like, jumped into my space? My immediate reaction was like, that's my space. Like, I own the road or something. Or like, I can control other people. Like, have you been to a Fred Meyer or a Costco recently? I think there's like a family at least in Tualatin that's got like 4 rooms completely full of toilet paper and kidney beans, as far as I can tell. And they are horrible, by the way, you people. I get frustrated, but I can't do anything about how other people behave. The only thing that I can control, and I can't even do that most of the time, is how I choose to respond. Like, David somehow figured this out. Like, you could completely understand David growing up with his father hating him and ashamed of him if he just decided to stay in the fields and mope around all day. Like, nobody likes me, everybody hates me. But my mom used to sing that to me, like when I was pouting at home. My mom would be like, nobody likes me, I'm gonna eat somewhere, until I would start to smile, and then I'd laugh. I hated it. I hated that. We wouldn't blame David if he would have pouted in the fields and just never even engaged life. And yet David doesn't. David has this terrible hand dealt, and yet he moves from this. The next story, he winds up in a situation that's even worse. Nobody wants this. The Israelites are being attacked by the Philistines, who are bigger and stronger, have better weapons, and then this giant Goliath steps into the fray and challenges everybody. Nobody steps forward. David could have easily just held his peace, pouted on the side, poor me again, and he doesn't. David's like, none of y'all are going to do it? David steps forward, and then he doesn't do it the way others think he should. He's creative. He's authentic. Instead of taking the heavy armor and the sword he can't even use, he says, the only thing that I'm really good at is slinging these stones. And he takes 5 smooth stones, and he starts to run, and he runs, and he slings that stone, and it sinks right into that giant's head. David engages life, and he's creative. I don't know if any of you remember the first children's sermon that I did here. It's going to be 16 years in September. Hopefully none of you remember this children's sermon, because it was like the worst children's sermon ever. First, it was based on a book called The Fireflies of Tualatin. I don't know what you know about the Pacific Northwest. It's amazing here. We have towering Doug firs, we have the oceans, we have mountains. We do not have fireflies. Not at all. And I had no idea of that fact, and I'm trying to talk to these children about these fireflies, at night, and they're looking at me like, fireflies? The second thing that makes this children's sermon the worst thing ever is that it's the fireflies of Tualatin. I'm embarrassed even saying this. Tualatin's a concentration camp in the Czech Republic. Hello, children. Pastor Ken here on my very first Sunday to talk to you. I'd like to tell you about concentration camps. That's a terrible idea. I was 28. Give me a break. The thing about the story that I was trying to lift out is that these children who had everything taken from them, like everything taken from them, instead of shutting down and instead of walling themselves in, and then instead of having only eyes for barbed wire and bars, these children go around this camp and they have the eyes for the flowers that are growing up through the cracks. They have the eyes for these fireflies at night, and they write poetry, and it was saved, it was kept, and we have it. Now, I know, we are not into raid zine. I know that. And it's hard. Every morning we've been doing a morning prayer at 9 a.m. on Zoom, and any of y'all are welcome to join us. And each day, as the news comes in and the numbers go higher and the Dow goes lower, people, I could feel, were getting more and more anxious. And hey, I wish this were not true, but I believe our scientists, it's going to get harder before it gets better. And when it's getting hard and we feel like things are being taken from us, that's when we have to remember this phrase, you, COVID-19, or you, whatever it is, you cannot take that which I freely give. We can't control the world. We never could. Like if we never knew that, this is the time to lean into that. What we can control sometimes is how we choose to respond. We can shrivel up, we can hoard, we can do that, or we can be the people that we've been called to be. We can be loving and creative. People are. I had a friend last night who made a mushroom and barley soup for her neighbor because she was shut in and she couldn't even go to the store. There was a high school in California, their performance was shut down, and so each of them videoed their part in the chorus, and then they all stitched it together. It's gorgeous. Or one of my friends who's in California, one of her neighbors came by and knocked on the door, and they said, hey, we're here because we're checking on seniors. And my friend said, oh, great, I'll join you. Until she realized, oh, I'm the senior you're checking on. People are finding ways to love all over the place. And now is the time to lean into that. You cannot take that which I freely give. That is the mantra that I remember my friend teaching us. It seemed like a cheap trick at first, something for a poster with an eagle soaring in flight. But when that black truck bearing an Oregonian sticker cut me off, I heard myself begin to chant, you cannot take that which I freely give. Instead of the rant, I could feel boiling inside of me. And do you know, it actually worked. It actually talked me down from off the emotional ledge from which I was about to lurch, wasting my precious expletive energies he so clearly did not deserve. And so now I take this phrase with me, wherever it is I go. The hospital, my family. For I have seen, no matter how hard we cling to life, the time for leaving inevitably arrives. I have seen, no matter how hard we cling to life, the time for leaving inevitably arrives. And the only choice we have at the end, is to claw at disappearance or learn to say, you cannot take that which I freely give, giving thanks for all that was. Blessing all there still is.